I didn't scream that afternoon. I'm 71 years old, and I want to tell you what happened in my kitchen on a Tuesday in March, because I've been holding on to it for 8 months now, and the holding is starting to wear me out. My name doesn't matter much for this story, but my grandson's does. His name is Bennett. He's 17 years old, he has autism, and 3 weeks before that Tuesday, a small tech company in Austin wired $4,200,000 into a trust account with his name on it. They bought the app he'd been building in my spare bedroom since he was 13 years old. The same spare bedroom where I used to keep my late husband's fishing gear before I cleared it out and put a desk in there. Because Bennett needed somewhere quiet that was just his. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My daughter walked out on Bennett when he was 5 years old. She didn't leave a note. She left a post-it on the refrigerator that said, "Mom, I can't do this anymore. Please don't call me." And she left a child's car seat by the front door with a duffel bag full of mismatched clothes and one stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear. Bennett was asleep in my recliner. I was making chicken and rice. I remember, because the rice burned at night. I forgot about it on the stove for almost 40 minutes because I was on the phone with everyone I knew trying to find her. I never did find her. Not for 11 years. She'd been struggling, I'll say that much. Her marriage had collapsed the year before. The father, Bennett's father, had left when the diagnosis came down, when Bennett was 3.5, and after that my daughter started drinking the way her father used to drink before the cirrhosis took him in 1998. I'd tried. God knows I tried. I drove from Macon to Atlanta every other weekend for 2 years to help her with Bennett, to take him to therapy appointments, to give her a break so she could sleep or breathe or just sit in the bathtub without somebody needing her. But I couldn't move in. I had my own house, my own husband at the time, and a job at the county clerk's office I couldn't walk away from. So when she dropped him off and disappeared, I quit that job within 6 weeks. My husband Carl and I were 60 and 63 respectively. We'd been talking about Florida, about a little place near Pensacola with a screened porch. Carl looked at me the morning after she left, and he looked at that little boy who wouldn't make eye contact with either of us, who lined his Cheerios up in a perfect row on the high chair tray, and he said, "Well, I guess we're parents again." He died 4 years later. Heart attack, in the Lowe's parking lot. He was loading mulch into the truck. So it was just me and Bennett after that. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. When my daughter left, she didn't just leave a child. She left a child the school system didn't want, that the state insurance wouldn't fully cover, that other children's parents quietly pulled their kids away from at birthday parties. She left a child who didn't speak a single word until he was almost 6. Who screamed for 45 minutes straight if his socks had a seam on the wrong side, who couldn't tolerate the sound of the dishwasher and made me hand wash every plate for 3 years. She left me a child the rest of the world had decided was too much trouble. And I want to tell you something else. He was the best thing that ever happened to me. I figured out the pattern thing by accident. He was about 7. I was paying bills at the kitchen table, sorting envelopes into piles by due date. And I noticed he was watching me. Really watching. Not the way he usually looked at things, which was always at the edge of them, never the center. He was looking right at my hands. When I got up to make coffee, he climbed into my chair and rearranged every single envelope. I thought he'd ruined it, that I'd have to start over. But when I sat back down and looked, he hadn't just stacked them. He'd ordered them by the postmark date, then by amount due, then by the color of the company logo from darkest to lightest. He was 7 years old. He'd never been taught any of that. I called his pediatrician the next morning. The doctor said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Mrs. Holloway, your grandson's brain is built for systems. He doesn't see the world the way we do. He sees the architecture underneath it." She told me to feed that part of him, to find things he could organize, sort, categorize, predict. I bought him a chess set at Goodwill for $2. By the end of that summer, he was beating me every time. I bought him an old desktop computer at a yard sale when he was 9. It was a Dell, ran Windows XP, and the woman selling it said it didn't work, but she'd take $15 for it. I gave her $20 because she looked like she needed it. Bennett had that computer running by the end of the weekend? I don't know how. I didn't ask. He started teaching himself code from library books and YouTube videos. By the time he was 12, he was building little programs that did things I didn't understand. By 13, he was building an app. The app, if you want to know, helps people on the autism spectrum navigate sensory overload in public places. You open it on your phone, and it uses your GPS to map nearby spaces. Then it color codes them based on noise level, lighting, crowd density, all kinds of things, with information that other users have submitted. So if you're somebody like Bennett, and you need to go to the dentist, or the DMV, or a grocery store, you can plan your route around the spaces that are going to overwhelm you. He built this for himself. He didn't know it was going to matter to anybody else. It mattered to over 600,000 people last I checked. When the tech company called, I almost didn't pick up. I thought it was a scam. They left a voicemail. I listened to it 4 times. Then I called my neighbor Doris, who used to work in HR for a logistics company in Atlanta, and I had her listen to it too. Doris said, "Honey, that's real. You need to get a lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer. I had Hollis. Hollis Trubridge had been Carl's poker buddy for 30 years. He did wills and small estate work out of a strip mall office in Warner Robins, and he hadn't taken on a real client in probably a decade. But he was honest, and he was cheap, and he was the only person I trusted. I called him. He said, "Marjorie, you bring that boy and that paperwork to my office on Thursday, and we'll figure this out together." It took 8 months to close the deal. There were contracts and negotiations and lawyers from the buying company who flew down from Austin to look at our house in disbelief, like they couldn't fathom that the kid who built the thing they were buying lived in a brick ranch in central Georgia with his grandmother and a mutt named Biscuit. Bennett did almost all of the talking in those meetings. He didn't look at any of them directly, but he answered every question they had with more precision than their own engineers could manage. I sat in the corner with my purse on my lap, and I cried twice, both times in the bathroom. The money cleared on a Wednesday in February. Hollis set up a trust because Bennett wasn't yet 18. The trust paid me a modest stipend as his guardian for his ongoing care. It paid for a financial advisor. It set aside money for his college, for his medical needs, for the home modifications we were planning so he'd have a proper studio. The rest was locked up safe until he came of age. We were going to be okay. For the first time in 12 years, I let myself exhale. That was February. In March, my daughter showed up at my front door. I didn't recognize her at first. She dyed her hair some kind of caramel color and lost about 30 pounds, and she was wearing a blazer, which I'd never seen her in once in her entire life. She was standing on my porch next to a man in a suit. He was holding a leather portfolio. She was holding a coffee cup from somewhere I'd never heard of. "Mama," she said, just like that, like 11 years was nothing, like she'd been gone for an afternoon. "I want to tell you that I slammed the door. I want to tell you that I told her to get off my porch and not come back. I want to tell you a lot of things about that moment, but the truth is, I just stood there with the screen door half open and my hand on the latch, and I couldn't make my mouth work." The man in the suit introduced himself. I don't remember what he said exactly. Something about being her attorney. Something about wanting to discuss an opportunity for reconciliation in the best interests of all parties. That's the kind of language he used. Like Bennett was a party. Like my grandson was a stakeholder in some kind of merger. She asked if she could come in. I said no. She started crying. The lawyer suggested we could meet somewhere neutral. A coffee shop. His office. I told them to leave my porch. I told them I'd call my own attorney. I shut the door, and then I sat down on the bench in my hallway and I shook for 20 minutes. Bennett came out of his room. He'd been listening. He sat down next to me, not touching me, because he doesn't touch people unless it's on his terms, but close enough that I could feel his shoulder almost against mine. He said, "That was my biological mother." I said yes. He said, "She left when I was 5. I said yes, sweetheart, she did. He said, "She knows about the app." And I looked at him, and I realized he wasn't asking. He figured it out before I had. He'd known the second he heard her voice through the door. Bennett doesn't miss things. He just doesn't always tell you what he sees. The papers came 2 weeks later. Certified mail. I had to sign for them on the porch with the postal carrier watching me like he knew something bad was inside that envelope. He probably did. She was suing for emergency reinstatement of parental rights. She was claiming I'd unduly influenced and isolated Bennett. She was claiming that, as his biological mother, she had a right to participate in financial decisions made on his behalf until he reached majority. There was a whole section about how my advanced age and limited education made me unfit to manage the kind of resources that were now flowing through Bennett's name. The word elderly appeared 4 times in the petition. So did the word vulnerable. But never about her son. Always about me. Hollis read the papers twice. Then he took off his glasses and he rubbed the bridge of his nose and he said, "Marjorie, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be a fight, and I don't know if we win it." I asked him what he meant. I'd had legal guardianship for over a decade. She'd abandoned the child. She'd never paid child support, never sent a birthday card, never called once in 11 years. How could she possibly have a claim? Hollis explained it to me slowly, the way you explain things to somebody who's about to have her heart broken. In Georgia, biological parental rights are not automatically terminated just because a parent abandons a child. They have to be formally terminated by a court. And in my case, I'd never gone through that process. I'd had guardianship, yes, but I had never filed to terminate her rights because I didn't want to spend the money and because I never thought she'd come back. Why would I? She'd told me not to call her. She'd vanished into thin air. Hollis said, without a termination ruling, she still has legal standing. She can argue that her abandonment was the result of mental health and addiction issues that she has now addressed. She can argue that she's seeking to rebuild a relationship. The court might side with us, but they might not. Judges are unpredictable, and the optics of a biological mother trying to reconnect with her son, especially a son with a disability, especially a son with money, are complicated. I asked him what we should do. He said, "We prepare. We document everything. We tell the truth." I went home that night, and I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table where she'd left that post-it 11 years before, and I made a list of every single thing I could remember about the early years. Every doctor's appointment I'd driven him to. Every IEP meeting I'd sat through at the elementary school. Every birthday I'd thrown him, even when he didn't want a party because parties were too loud. Every Christmas card she hadn't sent. Every phone call she hadn't made. Every time he asked me where his mommy was, and I told him she was sick and she loved him very much, even though I knew the first part was an excuse and the second part might not have been true at all. The hearing was set for a Thursday in late April. The courthouse was 40 minutes away, in a town I hadn't been to since Carl's funeral. I wore the navy blue dress I'd bought for my granddaughter's confirmation. Although that granddaughter wasn't Bennett's, she was my son's daughter who lived in North Carolina and barely called. Bennett wore khakis and a button-down shirt that he hated because the collar was too stiff. He practiced wearing it for 2 hours every evening for a week so he could sit through the hearing without panicking. That was his idea. He'd researched courtroom procedure online and made himself a desensitization schedule. I want to stop here for a moment, because I want to tell you what it is to love a child like Bennett and to watch him prepare for something like that. He didn't ask me to help. He didn't ask for comfort. He just sat in his room with his stiff shirt on and he stared at a wall and he timed himself and he worked the problem the way he worked every problem, by breaking it into pieces small enough to be solved. And it broke my heart and it filled my heart at the same time, because nobody had ever loved him enough to teach him that. He'd taught it to himself. He'd built his own life raft out of the lumber other people had left on the floor. The morning of the hearing, I made him oatmeal. He ate half of it. I made myself a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. Hollis picked us up in his old Cadillac, and on the drive over, he said, Whatever happens in there, we keep our composure. We don't react. We let her tell her story. We tell ours. The judge will see what the judge sees. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was an older judge with white hair, a court reporter, my daughter and her lawyer at one table, Hollis and me and Bennett at the other. There were maybe 4 people in the gallery. One of them was a reporter from the local paper. I didn't know that at the time. I found out later. She testified first. She told a version of the past that I almost didn't recognize. She talked about her struggles, which were real. I won't deny that. She talked about postpartum depression and then about the spiral after Bennett's diagnosis. She talked about getting clean 4 years ago, about a program in Tennessee, about a steady job at a marketing firm in Nashville. She said she'd wanted to reach out for years but had been afraid. She said she'd seen the news story about the app, and it had finally given her the courage to face her family again. Her voice broke when she said the word family. I sat there and I listened, and I felt a thing I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter than that. A kind of sad recognition. Because if she'd come to my porch a year before that, before the money, before the deal, I might have actually believed her. I might have opened the door. I might have wanted to, but she'd come after the money, and she'd come with a lawyer. And in 11 years of getting clean and working a steady job, she had never, not once, picked up a phone to ask if her son was even still alive. Hollis cross-examined her gently. He asked about the date she'd gotten clean. She said 4 years ago. He asked if she'd ever attempted contact with Bennett during those 4 years. She paused. She said she'd thought about it many times. He asked if a thought constituted contact. The judge sustained his own objection before her lawyer could even raise one. When it was my turn, I told the truth. I told it plainly. I didn't dress it up. I described that Tuesday afternoon with the burned rice. I described Bennett's first word, which was circle, at age 6.5, looking at the moon through the kitchen window. I described my husband's funeral, which Bennett had attended in a tiny black suit, holding my hand the whole time, even though he hated being touched. I described the IEP meetings, the special diet, the years it took to teach him to brush his own teeth. I described what it was to give up the Florida house and the screen porch and the life Carl and I had been planning, and I said I'd do it all again, 10,000 times over. Because Bennett was my child now, in every way that mattered. And a piece of paper in a courthouse couldn't make that more true or less true. I didn't cry. I told you at the beginning I didn't cry, and I didn't because I'd cried it all out a long time before, in private, on my own time, and when it counted, I had nothing left to give the room except the truth. Then the judge asked if Bennett wanted to speak. Hollis hadn't planned for that. Bennett wasn't the witness. He was a minor. But the judge looked at him, and Bennett looked back, more directly than I'd ever seen him look at anybody, and Bennett said, "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to say something." He walked up to the witness stand on his own. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her. He looked at the judge. He said, "I'd like to tell you about a photograph." He described a Polaroid that had been in a shoebox in my hall closet for over a decade. He'd found it when he was 9. Going through old things looking for batteries. The photo was dated on the back in my handwriting, October 14th, 2013. It showed my daughter sitting on a couch in an apartment I didn't recognize. She was holding a drink. Behind her, on the wall, was a calendar. The calendar said October 2014. The photo had been taken almost a year after she'd left Bennett. She'd been back in town. She'd been close enough to take a photograph in. She had not called. Bennett said, "I matched the apartment in the photo to a rental listing I found online when I was 12. The unit is in Marietta. It is 46 miles from my grandmother's house. My biological mother lived there for 2 years and 3 months according to the property records I accessed through the county database. During that time, she did not contact me or my grandmother." The lawyer at the other table stood up. Bennett kept talking. He said, "I also reviewed my biological mother's social media accounts, public accounts. I did not access any private information." There are photographs of birthday parties, weddings, vacations to Mexico and to Charleston, posted continuously from 2015 through last year. There are no photographs of me. There are no references to me. In one post from 2019, she is asked by a commenter whether she has children. She responds, and I quote, "No, thank God, never wanted them." I have the screenshot. He took a single folded sheet of paper out of his pocket and he handed it to the judge. The courtroom was very quiet. Bennett said, "I'm not telling you this because I want her to be punished. I'm telling you this because the petition says she had a relationship with me that was interrupted. There was no relationship. She did not interrupt it. She abandoned it. Then she heard there was money. Now she wants to participate. I understand the legal definition of participation. I do not believe it applies here." He paused. And I will remember this until the day I die. He turned, and he looked at her. Right at her. For the first time, he said, "My grandmother raised me. She is my mother in every way that I understand the word. I am asking the court to recognize that." Then he got down from the stand and he walked back to our table and he sat down next to Hollis and he stared at his hands. The judge took a long time to rule. He went into chambers. He came back 40 minutes later. He looked at my daughter and he looked at her lawyer and he said the petition was denied. He said he was further entering an order terminating her parental rights based on the documented abandonment and the unrebutted testimony. He said it should have been done 11 years before, and he was sorry it hadn't been. She didn't cry. She just sat there. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm and she shook it off. They left without looking at us. In the hallway after, a woman I didn't recognize stopped me. She introduced herself as the reporter from the paper. She asked if she could write a story about Bennett. I said no. I asked her not to print his name. She said she wouldn't if I didn't want her to, but that the story deserved to be told in some form someday. I said maybe someday. Then Hollis pulled me away. Bennett didn't speak on the drive home. He stared out the window the whole way. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned to me and he said, "Grandma, I need to lie down." He slept for 14 hours. The next morning, he came into the kitchen and he asked if we could go to the pancake place. He'd been to that pancake place exactly 4 times in his life because the booths were too crowded and the kitchen was too loud, but he loved their blueberry pancakes more than anything. We went. He ate 3. He didn't say much. But when we got back in the car, he said, "I want to set up a fund with some of the money for other kids like me, whose parents leave. I want grandparents to have lawyers when they need them. I want the kids to have whatever they need." I told him that was a beautiful idea. I told him we could do that. I told him I was proud of him. He said, "I'm proud of you too, Grandma." That was almost 6 months ago. The fund exists now. Hollis is on the board. So are 2 other lawyers and a woman from a disability rights organization in Atlanta who we'd never heard of before, but who has been a godsend. We've already helped 4 families. Bennett picks the cases. He reads every application himself. He says he can tell from the writing which ones are real. I believe him. He's never been wrong about anything that mattered. My daughter sent a letter in August. I haven't opened it. It's in the drawer of the entryway table. Maybe one day I'll open it. Maybe one day I'll open it. Maybe one day Bennett will. Maybe one day neither of us will. And that will be all right too. I started this story by saying I didn't cry that afternoon in my kitchen when the papers came. And I didn't. But I want to tell you something. The next morning, after the hearing, I was washing the breakfast dishes and Bennett was at the table working on something on his laptop, and Biscuit was asleep at my feet, and the sun was coming through the kitchen window, and I started crying. Not for the bad, for the good, for the small, unbelievable fact that the boy in the next room, who the world had once decided was too much trouble, had stood up in a courtroom and saved us both. I'm 71 years old. I quit my job at 60. I buried my husband at 64. I raised a child the world didn't want, and along the way, I think he raised me too. I don't know how much time I've got left. Nobody does. But I know this. I know that being his grandmother is the most important thing I have ever done with my life. And if you're out there listening to this, and you've got one of these kids, one of these wonderful, difficult, brilliant kids, and people have told you that you're crazy for taking them on, or that you're too old, or that you don't know what you're doing, I want you to hear me. You know exactly what you're doing. Keep going. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before I let myself say it out loud, and I want to tell you the part nobody talks about when these things happen. The part that comes after the courtroom empties out, and the lawyer pats your shoulder and the reporter gets turned away in the hallway. The part where you go home and you make dinner and you wash the dishes and you realize the thing that saved you wasn't luck. Bennett didn't win that hearing because of the money. He won it because of who he had become in the 11 years he was supposed to be unwanted. And he became that person because somebody decided to stay. That's the whole secret. There's no mystery to it. My daughter made a choice on a Tuesday in 2014, and I made a different choice on the same Tuesday, and the 11 years that followed weren't fate or fortune or anything magical. They were the slow accumulation of one small decision repeated daily. Show up. Show up again. Show up when it's hard. Show up when nobody's watching. Show up when there's no money in it, and no thanks coming and no end in sight. I think people want to believe that good outcomes are random. Because if they're random, then nobody has to do the hard thing. But the truth is harder and also kinder than that. Character compounds. The patience I gave that little boy when he couldn't tolerate his socks became the patience he gave himself when he was learning to code. The honesty I tried to live in front of him became the honesty he carried into that witness stand. He didn't pull that screenshot out of nowhere. He pulled it out of years of being raised to believe that the truth, told plainly, has a weight of its own. My daughter came back because she heard about the money, and that's the cause and effect of a life that hasn't been tended. You can't abandon something for 11 years and then claim a harvest. The soil doesn't work like that. The soil keeps score whether you watch it or not. So if you're listening to me and you're tired and you're raising somebody else's child, or you're showing up for somebody the world has written off, or you're doing the unglamorous, quiet work that nobody will ever put on a billboard, I want you to understand something. You're not just keeping a child alive. You're building the person who will one day stand up in a hard room and tell the truth on your behalf. You're growing your own defender. You're planting the conscience that will outlive you. I'm 71. I won't be here forever. But Bennett will be, and the fund will be, and the families we've helped will be, and that's a kind of inheritance no court can take away. Stay the course. Be decent when it costs you. Be smart when it's easy to be lazy. Be strong when it's easy to be lazy. Be strong when nobody can see you bending. The world rewards the wrong things loudly, but it rewards the right things permanently. I'm proof of that. And so is the boy in the next room.